So in our final session of the day, we're really delighted that Mike Fuller is going to share some reflections on the life and times, I suppose, of Arthur Peacocke, but his work in scholarly activity. Um, and I think it's a really nice sort of not conclusion to the conference because you're all coming back tomorrow, right? But having opened the first conference of the year um, with Chris Southgate's sort of personal reflections on Arthur, I think it's really nice to bring into this final conference looking at his influence on the work in science and religion, scholarly activity, particularly as SRF would not be here without Arthur. So, Mike, over to you.
Thanks very much, Finley. I'd like to share some slides with you, if that's okay. So I'm hoping I can do that simply by doing this. So it's very good to be with you this afternoon at this third SRF conference in this Arthur Peacocke centenary year, looking at aspects of his theological legacy. And what I want to do in this short paper is broaden out our considerations of that legacy by considering another practical aspect of his work. I don't think an abstract was circulated in advance, so here's one by way of introducing what I want to say. Arthur's pioneering work as a theologian is well known. His important work examining and publicizing issues like panentheism, continuous and co-creation, and possible top-down, or as he preferred to call it, whole-part constraint, mechanisms for divine action. All this is justly celebrated. But in addition to these influential publications, I think a lasting and significant part of his legacy was his involvement in setting up various organizations, of which I want to talk about four: the Ian Ramsay Centre at the University of Oxford, this Science and Religion Forum, the European Society for the Study of Science and Theology, and the Society of Ordained Scientists. Now, these organizations were all set up with different purposes in mind, but the persistence and ongoing work of each, I think, continues to bear witness to the vision of those who originated them. And so what I'm wanting to set out in this paper is how each forms an important part of the legacy of Arthur Peacocke. Now, Arthur, of course, wrote an autobiography with the title From DNA to Dean that came out in 1996. But in that autobiography, he rather modestly devotes a total of less than 3 pages to all his activities in this area. So his own brief accounts of the origins of these organizations are therefore supplemented here with further comments, some of them from others who were involved with those origins. So first off, the Ian Ramsay Centre. Now, this particular section of what I want to say is heavily indebted to Mike Parsons, whom some of you I'm sure will know, and he's shared his recollections of the history of this centre with me. Though the IRC was set up in the course of 1984 and formally inaugurated at the start of 1985, Peacocke himself noted that by then this was a project that had been gestating for over 20 years. The idea for such a centre might in fact be dated as far back as 1962, and a meeting of the University Teachers Group concerned about the role of theology in the rapidly expanding higher education field in the UK. This teachers group had discovered that in the years 1950 to 1962, there were 619 doctoral theses submitted at UK universities in theology and allied subjects, and only a very tiny number of these made any attempt to address the relationship between theology, society, and the ethical implications of science and technology. Now, this time, the early 60s, society was in an era of huge technological growth, and a big impact had been made by C.P. Snow's famous Reed lecture on the two cultures in 1959, subsequently published as The Two Cultures and the Scientific Revolution. I'm sure you'll be familiar with this, but it provoked a heated discussion for many who were concerned about this apparent divorce between science and the humanities. And Ian Ramsay who at this point was the Nolloth Professor of the Philosophy of the Christian Religion at Oxford, was sufficiently concerned to make this the subject of a university sermon in June 1964 and a subsequent publication in the journal Theology. At this time, a parallel concern for the study of religion and society was also being promoted by the Church of England's Board of Social Responsibility. And this board was responsible for convening a meeting of interested parties in March 1965 with Ian Ramsay in the chair. And everyone there declared that some sort of institute was needed. And the Board of Social Responsibility affirmed this absolutely, but did very little to actually achieve anything at that point. Now, Ian Ramsay suddenly, who became Bishop of Durham, sadly died early in 1972. But with his death, the idea of an institute was revived with the additional suggestion that it be named after him as an acknowledgement of his role at the forefront of theological interdisciplinary studies, and recognizing also his original promotion of the idea of a centre like this. Eventually, in 1979, St Cross College expressed support for the idea of an Ian Ramsay Centre based there, in the University of Oxford. The search for funding for such a centre was actively pursued by Arthur Peacocke, by Professor Basil Mitchell, and with the support of such luminaries as Professor Henry Chadwick and the then Archbishop of Canterbury, Robert Runcie, sufficient funding was obtained, and the Ian Ramsay Centre was duly opened in 1985, with Arthur appointed as its first founding director. The initial intention for the centre, so I think that's, yeah, the initial intention for the centre was that it should focus on the ethical issues raised by science, medicine, and technology, endeavouring to reflect on these from a theological perspective. And to this end, 3 working parties were established, studying persons and personality, values, conflict and the environment, and medical decision-making and the concept of quality of life. These working parties all produced printed output in various forms, as well as sponsoring a series of seminars. Well-attended seminars were also held on a variety of topics such as bioethics and geriatrics. Eventually, however, funding dried up. The second phase of activity for the centre came through the auspices of the John Templeton Foundation. It was suggested that a programme that the foundation had started in the United States, funding workshops at universities in order to equip faculty staff to teach multidisciplinary courses in science and religion, might be expanded beyond the United States to cover the rest of the world. And contacts that had been made through lectures, which the John Templeton Foundation sponsored in London around this time, led to Oxford becoming the initial focus of this rest of the world activity. So this science and religion course program, which was initially an 8-year initiative, Oxford joined in 1995 in year 2, provided 2 events per year at each centre. A January workshop for those wishing to learn more about preparing a course at university level in science and religion, and then a summer conference for those who won one of the many awards made in each year. Nearly 700 such awards were made over the duration of this programme, and one of them was in fact to myself and Ruth Page to establish science and religion courses at the University of Edinburgh. The Ian Ramsay Centre also negotiated funding from the Templeton Foundation for a series of seminars for local scholars in Oxford and external conferences in other locations, mainly in the UK, all promoting the study of science and religion. Particularly noteworthy were 3 events in Ireland that enabled the start-up of an Irish group concerned with the study of science and religion, leading in due course to that subject figuring strongly in the state religious education syllabus. Now, from all this, it'll be readily apparent that the Ian Ramsay Centre has had a significant outreach in terms of its work expanding the study of science and religion. It, of course, continues to play very much an active role in sponsoring conferences and so on. Fulfilling its stated aim on its website, conducting research into religious beliefs and theological concepts in relation to the sciences, and the application of scientific tools to religious phenomena. So I think the ongoing work of this centre can't be overlooked in any assessment of the legacy of Arthur Peacocke. Moving on to the Science and Religion Forum, Arthur described the instantiation of the forum with his characteristic brevity, writing, "In the early 1970s, I started in Britain informal consultations between scientists, theologians, and clergy who were concerned to relate their scientific knowledge and methods of study to their religious faith and practice. This initially small group grew in numbers as it faced these increasingly complex issues, and in 1975, the Science and Religion Forum was formally inaugurated in Durham." Mike Parsons recalls that this expanding group was also supported very much by Bishop John Habgood, who at that time was Bishop of Durham, went on to become Archbishop of York, and he was the first president of the Science and Religion Forum. Mike Parsons himself subsequently serving the forum as treasurer, membership secretary, and finally secretary. Over the years, the forum has been steered by such scholars as Kenneth Wilson, John Hedley Brooke, Chris Southgate, Neil Spurway, Andrew Robinson, myself, Mark Harris, Gillian Strain, and our sharing in this online conference this afternoon is, of course, testimony to the forum's continuing to thrive under today's chair, Finlay Lawson. The forum has always had an important role in bringing together those with an issue in an interest, in interactions of science and religion from both inside and outside the academy. Its conferences offering a chance for scholars and lay people with both scientific and theological backgrounds to share their work and their perceptions. An important part of its membership base has always been ministers of various denominations, many of whom will, I'm sure, see the forum as offering opportunities to address the science and religion conflict myth as it's found in wider society today. The forum serves this membership and wider society through various publications. There's its journal, Reviews in Science and Religion, and also a series of books that was published in the wake of conferences, collectively titled Conversations in Science and Religion. More recently, of course, conference papers have found a home in special issues of the journal Zygon. The conference next year, as has already been mentioned today, will see the SRF celebrating its 50th anniversary as an organisation dedicated to promoting discussion between scientific understanding and religious thought on issues at the interface of science and religion, with a membership open to people of any religion or none. And this, of course, 50 years is a very significant milestone, bearing once again witness to the ongoing influence of Arthur Peacocke in the science and religion community as one of the original founders of this forum. If anyone, incidentally, who's here has any further recollections of the setting up of the forum, which you'd be interested in sharing with me, I'd be very interested indeed to hear from you. So do please get in touch. Moving on, Arthur's involvement in setting up the European Society for the Study of Science and Theology, ESSAT, was perhaps a more tangential one. An important inspiration, though, behind this society was a series of conferences held by the Institute on Religion in an Age of Science on Star Island off the coast of New Hampshire, a series founded by Ralph Wendell Burho. Peacocke was a regular attender at these conferences, and it was there that he met Karl Schmitz-Moran, a German Roman Catholic theologian, and with him they conceived the idea of a European conference equivalent to these ones on Star Island. Going back to Peacocke's own words again, he noted that even as SRF commenced its operations, there were similar groups concerned with these themes in science and religion coming into existence, that were all the time coming into existence in other parts of Europe. After an initial exploratory consultation convened by me in September 1984, he wrote, the first European Conference on Science and Religion was held at the Evangelische Akademie at Loccum in the Federal Republic of Germany on the topic of evolution and creation. This conference took place in 1986. Mike Parsons notes that ESAT was formally set up at the Second European Conference on Science and Religion at Twente University in Enschede in the Netherlands in 1988. On this occasion, at Peacocke's insistence, Mike Parsons was the UK signatory to the founding document of ESAT rather than Peacocke himself. Wim de Vries, who will be a familiar figure, I'm sure, to many, has given a detailed account of the background to these and subsequent ESAT conferences in a paper titled The Early History of the European Conferences on Science and Religion and of ESAT. And he noted there that organising Europe-wide conferences was a significant achievement, given factors such as the diverse religious and philosophical landscapes of that continent. He also describes the significant naming of ESAT as the European Society for the Study of Science and Theology, the original conferences being dubbed European Conferences on Science and Religion. This new appellation was seen by some as restrictive in laying too much of an emphasis on the Christian tradition, bearing witness perhaps to tensions within early membership of the Society regarding its sense of direction. In terms of Peacocke's own input to the early days of ESAT, de Vries writes, Peacocke was crucial in setting up the, at that time still Western European network, and by being a speaker, giving credibility to its first conference. But Peacocke was not a regular attendee at ESAT conferences subsequently, and didn't serve on the Society's council. That role again fell to Mike Parsons. In the case of ESAT, it appears Arthur seems to have felt that after giving some initial impetus to the project, his energies might best be focused elsewhere. Like the SRF, ESAT publishes a journal, also titled Reviews in Science, Religion and Theology. This is currently produced in collaboration with the International Society for Science and Religion. And ESAT's conferences have yielded a series of books titled collectively Issues in Science and Theology, of which latterly I've been the lead editor. I'm thrilled that Louise Hickman of Newman University in Birmingham takes over from the most recent ESAT conference earlier this year as the lead editor of this book series. A final word now about the Society of Ordained Scientists. If I can get this to work. Yes. Which I believe was a project that was particularly dear to Arthur's heart. As far back as 1960, he was invited by Bishop Mervyn Stockwood to address a Southwark diocesan meeting, at which, Arthur later wrote, I dropped the hint that what was needed in the 20th century was the flexible equivalent of what the Dominican order had been at its foundation, namely a resource for the church and its shock troops in meeting the intellectual challenges of its day. Concrete action in pursuit of this idea was spurred by conversations between Arthur and people like Eric Jenkins, who at that time was science advisor to the Diocese of Liverpool, together with fellow ordained scientists John Chalmers and John Carr. In his autobiography, Peacocke fleshed out his vision for this society, writing this. I saw that the Church needs not only intellectual inquiry of the kind stimulated by SRF and ESAT, but it needs a cadre of committed and informed members to constitute a new kind of Dominican order, held together by prayer and sacrament, and committed to the life of science for and on behalf of the Church, to represent the Church in science and science in the Church. So it was that in 1987, there was founded, initially within the Church of England, a new dispersed order, the Society of Ordained Scientists. There was some debate, incidentally, about how that should be abbreviated. SOS wasn't thought to be entirely appropriate, but SOSC was finally agreed upon. An order held together by a rule of prayer and sacrament, to which we are committed through appropriate vows made at an annual Eucharist. At its initial meeting in 1987, there were 27 founder members of the society. By 2020, this had grown to around 200, with about 1/3 of that number living in the United States and Canada. The society is structured around 5 aims, which focus on serving the church and expressing its commitment to science and technology and concern for the impact of science and technology on the world, and developing a mutually supportive fellowship of prayer, offering to God the work of science and technology in the exploration and stewardship of creation. As befits an organization modeled after a religious order, it has a rule which is threefold: to pray daily for the aims of the society and for its members, to remember the society and its members regularly at public worship, and to endeavour to attend the annual gathering and retreat of the society. As that rule suggests, a key event for the society and its members is an annual gathering at which new members are admitted and where there's usually input from a distinguished guest speaker or speakers. This society produces its own periodical, a bulletin, which often reproduces this kind of input from the gatherings. Keith Suckling's book, titled We Are the Data, that title expressing Suckling's own response to the demand for the evidence about the compatibility of science and faith. His response is, well, we are the data. This book, I think, offers a valuable account of the society, drawing heavily on the insights of its members themselves. Society of Ordained Scientists was born from the conviction of Peacocke and its other founders that for those with a priestly vocation, a purely academic response to the dialogue of science and theology needs supplementing in some way, something else being necessary to enable a response of heart as well as head, if you like, to facilitate a sacramental commitment for members so that they can help to enable the church as a whole to respond to that dialogue in vigorous and creative ways. So just wrapping up, I think it's clear that in his lifetime, Arthur Peacocke played an important role in shaping the landscape of the academic engagement of science and theology through his writings, as this year's SRF conferences have very fully and amply demonstrated. Additionally, though, through his writings, through his involvement in organizations like those that I've been discussing, the IRC, the SRF, ESAT, and SOSC, Arthur's influence remains an ongoing one, shaping the discourse of science and theology. It's striking that some of the topics dealt with in the early days of these societies, which very much reflected Arthur's own interests, are very much still with us. Topics like evolution and creation, the nature of the human person, divine action, and so on. More recently, though, these societies have focused on subjects which reflect the ongoing development of the field in ways which Arthur himself might not have anticipated, exploring subjects such as the naturalness of religion, the role of emotion, mental well-being, artificial intelligence, the part played by narrative in shaping scientific and religious discourse. This was the topic covered most recently by ESAT at its meeting last summer. So I'd suggest that in reflecting on the legacy of Arthur Peacocke, as we've been doing very much this year, it behooves us to note his role in setting up these organizations, which have done so much to facilitate the ongoing development of the field of science and religion. And I think we should celebrate Arthur, not just for his academic work, but also for his practical work in facilitating this ongoing dynamic development of the science and religion field. the liveliness and fecundity of that field today, I think, is a very important aspect of the legacy of Arthur Peacocke. So thanks very much for your attention. I'd be very interested indeed to hear your own thoughts, and indeed, many of you, or some of you present, may have recollections yourself of Arthur and his involvement with these societies. And I'd be very interested to hear from you. Thanks very much for your attention.
Thanks very much, Mike. Really appreciate it. And just brilliant capturing of Arthur's work. I'm hesitant to say let's open to questions because it then feels like I'm opening you up to an edition of Mastermind where people are going to test you on your in-depth knowledge of said forums. But I think what you said was lovely. Has anyone got anything they would like to add? Any comments, any thoughts, any reflections of their own? Or any questions for Mike about the life and times of Arthur Peacocke? John.
I've tried to get copies of his Theology and Age of Science and found they're a ridiculous price. I wonder, there isn't a library you can borrow any of his works, is there?
If you have access to university libraries, I'd be very. Most should have copies of Arthur's work. I'm sorry to hear you're finding it difficult to get hold of copies at sensible prices. I'm sure I saw it on Amazon not that long back. Do dig around.
I did try Amazon.
You
I
did?
did try Amazon. It was about £40, I think.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
As book prices go these days, that's not excessive.
So. Yeah. Could I also ask you?
It's quite a chunky tome and very well worth reading.
Could I ask you too? This society that was set up for ordained scientists, has it remained Anglican?
I should have said no, it hasn't. It's very much now interdenominational. There are many other denominations, in addition to the Anglicans, engaged with that.
Thanks, Mike. Other John. Sorry, I didn't realise two Johns had their hands up at the same time.
It's a well-known name, Finn. It would be strange if I hadn't got something to say, but let me just say, Mike, that was so important and so beautifully organized. I learnt a lot from it because, as you know, I've expressed my own ignorance about the foundation of some of these societies. There's just one thing about the IRC that perhaps I was in a privileged position to see. And that is that one of Arthur's achievements in Oxford was to secure a place for the Ian Ramsay Centre within the formal university administration structure of the theology faculty. So when I arrived in Oxford in 1999, I almost automatically became director of the Ian Ramsay Centre because it was then integrated within the theology faculty. And I do know that Arthur had to work very hard to overcome some resistance to that particular development. I'm happy to say that subsequently, I think the theology faculty has very much valued the presence of the IRC within it. And perhaps it's just worth noting that Mark Harris, who was a chair of the Science and Religion Forum, recently went to be the fourth Andreas Idrius Professor of Science and Religion, where he, of course, is now director of the Ian Ramsay Centre. So there are very happy relations between SRF and the RIC. And they have been mediated by developments, again, for which Arthur was responsible.
Thank you very much indeed for that, John. Yes, I wasn't aware of all that Arthur did with regard to the theology faculty, but I believe now it is simply part of the form, isn't it, that the Andreas Idrios chair also heads up the IRC. And so thereby, again, integrating and is ensuring the ongoing relationship
Yeah, I think
between
the
the faculty.
ensuring is the nice point,
Yeah.
actually, given that the IRC in its initial days, as you pointed out, was not always financially secure.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you both. And just a final one from Luca, which I think we'd probably all quite like. It's just it'd be really nice to see some photos of some of the founding meetings, should there be any loitering in filing cabinets or wherever. And I think we could all agree if there are some floating around, it'd be a nice collection to add to Mike's word. So
yes, indeed. Keith Suckling's book that I mentioned on the Society of Ordained Scientists has some photos of early meetings of that body. I'm not aware, but yes, if anybody can punt any towards me from SRF, I'd love to see that. Yeah, thank you.
thank you so much, everyone. Unless anyone else has any thoughts or comments. So thank you once again, Mike. I really appreciate that. Really interesting, like you say, to hear about that wider legacy.